So what do I press?
You just press this. Yeah, press it again, it'll unmute.
Okay, so.
It's muted now.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started in about 30 seconds, so get yourselves comfortable and we'll get going. So first of all, I want to do a big welcome to the 2015 Career Thought Leaders Conference and thank everybody for joining us. We're very, very excited to be offering this program both live. We've got a live audience as well as video streaming. And we have people attending the video stream from throughout the U.S., Canada, number of European countries, Singapore, South America, around the world. So I believe there's about 140, 150 people attending virtually, so we're excited that all of you are with us as well. Just very briefly about this morning's schedule, we're going to do a couple quick announcements, and then we'll start with Jerry Crispin, our presenter. He will stop about halfway through the program so that everybody in attending live and virtual people have the opportunity to take a quick 10-minute break and then get reseated, and we'll finish up with the second half of his program. I want to take a minute to just introduce a couple of people. If you would just raise your hand in the audience, I want to acknowledge the CTL board members, Michelle Carroll, Jan Melnick, who is on her way over, Stephen Van Vriede. There's Jan, I just mentioned her name. Wave and say hi, here's Jan. And I want to acknowledge Ruth Winden, who couldn't join us, but Ruth, hi in the UK, we miss you, but we're glad you're with us virtually. Then it is with great pleasure that I introduce you to the new owner of Career Thought Leaders and the Resume Writing Academy, Marie Zimenoff.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you all for being here. We're so excited to have everyone in the room and on our virtual stream. I am pleased today to get to introduce our sponsors. And our sponsor for this event, our main sponsor for this event, is Eric Langley with Career Insights. And we're so pleased that Eric's decided to partner with us. Eric would like you to know that Career Insights is dedicated to making a difference in people's lives by helping them become aware of, understand, and account for their unique motivations and behavioral style, which he believes, and we all know as career professionals, is key to their effectiveness, personal fulfillment, and finding the perfect fit job. To accomplish this, Career Insights partners with career professionals, helping them acquire and serve clients by leveraging the Career Insights Hidden Motivators Personal Styles profile. You've probably been familiar with assessments. Most of us in the career field use them. But what makes Career Insights different is that instead of charging the career professional per assessment, they do a monthly subscription so that you can use as many of those profiles as you'd like to find those hidden motivators and personal styles. So you can see by yourself if you want to receive a complimentary profile, and as we bring up the slide here for Career Insights, you can use this invite code that's in your handout to get your complimentary profile. So thank you again, Eric. And he's available to answer any questions that you have. And if you're joining us on the tweet chat, you can reach him at _Eric_Langley. We also have a second sponsor for our conference today, which is the Resume Writing Academy. And the Resume Writing Academy, as most of you know, offers resume writing training. So we do our e-summits that get you engaged in a specific resume writing topic, and we'll have our LinkedIn summaries and LinkedIn profile writing e-summit coming up on June 26th. So watch for information about that. We also have their flagship resume writing training, which culminates in earning the Academy Certified Resume Writing Credential. This program is unique in offering 6 90-minute sessions on resume writing and an individualized feedback system where you get feedback on at least 6 different projects. So if you're looking to take your writing to the next level, the ACRW can help you do that. You'll see that you have a coupon code in your handouts. If you register by May 1st, you can get that discount off of getting your ACRW. I'm also happy to answer any questions about that. You can reach me at Marie, M-A-R-I-E, at resumewritingacademy.com. So those are our sponsors for today, and now we get on with the program. And Louise Kurzmark, who all of you know, is going to introduce Jerry.
Thank you. When we were thinking about who could we get for this program, someone who's going to give us valuable information that we don't hear every day, someone who's a great speaker, and someone who's going to give us actionable items, things that we can really use in working with our clients. We couldn't think of anyone better than Jerry Crispin, so we were delighted that he was able to join us. Our clients might not believe it, but there are a lot of companies out there who really care about the candidate experience. They want it to be good because they know it affects the kind of talent that they can attract to their companies. And Jerry works with top companies around the world, helping them figure out what they're doing well and not so well, and sharing all of that research in efforts that he updates and improves every year. So he's got incredible insights. He calls himself a lifelong student of staffing. He's been in his whole career, and his information will help us to provide better information to our clients. So it's a pleasure to introduce Jerry Crispin of Career Crossroads.
Cool. I think I have to turn this little thing on. A couple things. Does that work? Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah. So if I project too much, then you have a problem. So I want to take you on an adventure. I want to share with you some opinions, some observations, and some data about an area that I'm particularly passionate about, which is the candidate experience. But I have to tell you, I am passionate about every single aspect of recruiting. So if you want to go in a couple different directions during the course of our time together, I'm okay with that, and I can still engage around the key pieces that I want to share with you. And so I'll get to that in a minute, but a couple basic things I think we should take care of. One, I don't do podiums. So I'm going to stand pretty much in this area, and so Stephen, if you want to, you could sit over there, but if you don't want to, because that's okay, I just want you to be aware that I'm always going to be at your back. So that's a cool thing. A couple things that you should know about me. I have an interesting business that's evolved over the last 10 or 12 years in which I work with staffing leaders in very large corporations, not so much to share with them, but to help them talk to each other about what they do or don't do, and what works and what doesn't work. So it's not me telling them, it's them telling each other, and they become, in effect, my focus group, if you think about it. I get paid a stupid amount of money to have a focus group where I get to learn in an ongoing way. I do that 8 times a year for a day and a half, which means I get to work 12 days a year. So, you know, I made up my own job, and it works for me. I do, however, and I will be talking about a nonprofit that I started 4 years ago that does get heavily involved in collecting and disseminating information about the candidate experience. So that's kind of the subject here. I do a lot of different things, and you had a bio that you could read. Probably the only thing that I think would be really relevant, because I'm never on your side of the coaching, anybody calls me up and asks for help getting a job, it's usually a clue they should be talking to one of you, and so I send them out in that direction. However, I will tell you that once a year, my business partner and I write a resume. Now, it's a fake resume. And the cool thing is I can lie a lot on that resume. And the other cool thing is I know most of the companies on the Fortune 100 best companies in America to work for, and I take several of them each year, and I send my resume to them and or apply in their companies. So I'll apply to Zappos, I'll apply to Wegmans, I'll apply to REI and others initially, and then I call them up and say, okay, search for that job. And then they tell me where it comes up for the recruiters, right? So they've applied, I've inserted everything, and now I keep tweaking that until I know whether it's Taleo they're using or iCIMS or PeopleFluent or whatever ATS they're using, I can be assured that I'm going to come up first or second. And that's kind of cool because then I know how they're going to treat me as one of the top possible candidates. So each year, I apply to the 100 best companies in America to work for under an assumed name. The first time I did that was as Viddy Boombots, who worked for Bada Bing Corporation as a collections supervisor. And I can assure you, he won many awards for his skill in collections. I got in a little trouble with that, in part because it got written up in the Wall Street Journal, and I got a note from somebody who thought I was defaming Italians. So since that time, we've done Kris Kringle and a few others along the way, but I've been doing that for almost 15 years now. And what it does tell me is how quickly and readily some of the best companies to work for have aligned, if you will, their recruiting experience to provide something similar. And I encourage all of you to think about, as part of what you do in either resume writing or coaching, is to do a little mystery shopping on your own. Apply to some of the more interesting companies that you may want to deal with on a regular basis, and see how people respond to that. I'm always a fan of applying to Zappos simply because they have, and Container Corporation are the two companies that do a better job in turning you down, as you will likely be turned down, than any other company in the United States. They still are the best at it, which is very cool. And that is a piece of candidate experience, because when you think about it, for every 99 or one that gets the job, 99 do not. So I just wanted to share that with you because I think that's the only connection we kind of have directly. But my resumes are all fake, so it's a whole different kind of thing. So I want to really talk about 4 different segments of this candidate experience. I'd like to set the stage, spend a little time with you, and get you to help me better understand how you see this as well. So I want to set the stage of how we define candidate experience and what the context is for establishing a great candidate experience. Then I want to tell you some stories of companies that are, in fact, doing an extraordinary job, in part because of some of the specific things that they're doing. And so I want to elaborate on some of the slides that I shared with you. Then I'd like to tell you the 4 things they have in common, and then delve a little more deeply in terms of the quality and type of information that we're collecting on a now global basis. And for those folks who are listening from other countries, we are in Europe this year, so there will be a lot more data next year to share from Europe, as well as from Australia and New Zealand. Most of the information that I'm sharing today comes from the United States and a few companies from Canada, but those things will continue to grow. So I just wanted to do that. And Wendy, let me ask you this. If somebody is watching and they have a question, how are they going to respond? You probably have told them, but how would they ask that question here?
They'll tweet it to @CareerTL.
And Melissa or somebody will see that? You? Okay, that's good. Just checking. You didn't kind of mention that earlier, so I just wanted to check. All right, cool. And then whoever gets that, if you think it's relevant to right now, you feel free to stop me. I have no trouble if somebody goes, oh, wait a second, I need some clarification. So let's talk a little bit about the context of the candidate. The most extraordinary cliche that I hear literally almost every day is let's treat our candidates as customers. And I usually, throw up after about 2 minutes or something like that. I'm convinced we are moving in that direction, but the reality is the truth of that statement is more of a cognitive dissonance, is more of an illusion that we would like to create. So let's step back a moment, because I do talk to a lot of recruiters about this, and usually it takes them 20 minutes to get it. With you, you're coming from a whole different perspective, so you already get it. But still, step outside of your box and think in terms of customer. You are customers of a lot of different corporations. And think of the coolest experience you've had as a customer. Anybody think about that? I'd love for you to share that. Yeah.
Google called me on the telephone
So Google called you on the
to
telephone.
make sure that I was okay after I had a problem.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So how did they know that you had a problem?
Well, I submitted a ticket,
You submitted a ticket,
and they called me to make sure everything was okay afterwards.
and they called you, okay, and where was this ticket?
It was like a support ticket.
Oh, okay. And they actually called you and got to it. So they obviously have lots of cool resources. Wouldn't that be great if you went to Glassdoor and said, geez, I had a problem with this company, and a few minutes later the recruiter called you up and said, what? I'm sorry, what problem? I didn't get back to you fast enough? How cool is that? Wouldn't that be really cool? That doesn't happen too often. What else happens when you have a great customer experience? Yes.
I tell everyone I like to share good news with my friends and family. I've read
Got it.
about
So, but what would that experience have been? So I get that, and I'm going to show you data around all of that, because I think increasingly we're seeing the trend of how willing people are to share their good and bad experience. But what is an example of something that you would share a great experience about?
Sure. I've been going for physical therapy, and I was concerned where I was going that they perhaps were a little bit intimidated, and the level of care that I've gotten was far better than any care I've gotten elsewhere. They were just very attentive, thorough, friendly, helpful.
Got it.
Um,
So once you get in the door of a store or whatever, in this case a healthcare organization, when you're dealt with by the people, each of those individuals is in fact being clear to be attentive. They care about you. They take you from place to place. They do it consistently. They thank you for being here. Those kinds of things, as opposed to trying to figure out how to get in the door because it's locked, and then they buzz you in. Never mind. You know where I'm going with that, right? So and then who do you want to see? Really? I don't know if they're here right now. Sit down over there. We'll eventually get somebody to come over to you. So it's that kind of thing. How about what else? You walk into a store. Yes.
This is not a store, but I have this fitness tracker.
Yes.
It's made by Jawbone, and I recommend them, even though the quality is terrible. They've had to replace it 3 times, but their service is so good that I have recommended it to several other people, even though, because I know they're going to take care of the problems when they inevitably arise.
All right. It's a lousy job. It's a lousy job, and I'm not going to get it. But or I've had it for a while, but I'm still recommending it because somebody takes care of me whenever I need to. They fix things. Okay, interesting. 1 or 2 more. Yes.
I recently visited the Salamander Resort for the first time out in Middleburg, Virginia, and their customer service is beyond incredible. I mean, anything you need, they'll go out of their way to do it. And to give you a specific example, like no one is limited to, well, this is just my job or this is just my, whatever you need, people will go. People will take care of it.
So they give it to you.
Exactly.
So one of the things you all are talking about is you get to choose your product. You get to choose. They can't keep you out. You get in the store. That doesn't happen with candidates, right? You get to the door, they need your resume or they need something. That's basically it, right? You don't even know who's in the store unless you do a little bit of work, right? They don't tell you about that. What happens when you go into a store or you're at the store, but you haven't bought anything, so you haven't applied, etc.? What do you see about the products? In a great store, you've just walked in. They're out, they're displayed, you can see them, they're very visual. And we can see that companies have changed a lot in terms of providing a little bit more visual evidence of what the job is about, right? They've started to learn a little bit of that. And so one of the issues that we tend to see that is true is if you look at a company, you're likely to see some visual evidence of jobs. But is it the visual evidence that you want? Well, let's talk about the product. What is it that you notice about a product? Price? Right. Is good material? Where does the material come from? Etc. You know, so you get it. It's clothes, or it's a handbag, or it's shoes. So we get the job. The question is, now we're looking at something else underneath this, right? How was it made? Who made it? How long will it last? When was the last time that you were able to determine from the company the average tenure for people in that job? On the other hand, as coaches, how hard would it be to search LinkedIn for all the people in a given company with a particular job title who either are or were in that company, and you would then have a distribution of what? How long on average they're in that job, and what percentage of them stay or leave. And did they leave right away from that job, or did they go to other jobs before they left? Was it a development issue? Or is that manager or those people driving people out? You're coaches, right? The data is there. I'm just suggesting that one of the things we haven't thought about is that all the data for being a customer is in fact available to you today. It's just nobody has put it together as an app. So I can't put a job into an app and say, tell me who the likely recruiter is that's working on this. Tell me who the likely hiring manager is. Tell me how many people the hiring manager has ever had working for him or her and where they are now. And show a cool map. That's tomorrow. But it's easy to think about because it exists today. Somebody with a lot of money is going to put that together, take that data, and make a lot of money selling it to you for your folks. So they'll be a reseller. You'll be a reseller of something like that, right? You're smiling, but you know it. You'd buy that in a moment, right? And you would work it. But you could do that. You have the skills to think about where is this data and what else should I really be helping them determine. I'm trying to tell them to ask these questions. Well, hell, I can answer most of those questions that you want them to ask. So they should be able to go in doing that, in my opinion. Just saying. If we're a customer, we're coming to the store. If we're a candidate, we should be coming with the same attitude. You know, I'm making choices just like the company is making choice, right? So that's part of what you're setting your clients up to be able to do. But that means they have equal access to data, because on the other side, I'm scraping every footprint that you have on the internet and adding that to your LinkedIn profile and to your resume and to your application and coming up with a level of sentiment around that. And then I'm stack ranking you against some algorithm so I determine beforehand exactly which candidates I want to see. Companies are doing that right now if they've got the money. So why aren't you doing the same thing? So the candidate as customer is not here yet. And when I talk to recruiters, I ask them, I start at a much more basic level than this. And I basically ask them, what's a candidate? And none of them know consistently. There is not a consistent definition for a candidate. They will say, well, candidate is everyone who can do the job. Or it's everyone who expresses an interest in the job. Or it's everyone who's qualified and that gets to the finalist stage. Or the candidate is the person that I made the offer to, right? All of those things. And I get it. That's where recruiters' heads are today. But the reality is that the candidate determines whether or not they're a candidate or not. The moment that a person expresses an interest in a company is when they believe they're a candidate, and so they're operating on a basis of expectation that either you have set or the company has set, or in lieu of those two things, they've set. And unfortunately, if they're setting their expectations, it's totally unrealistic. Ask any candidate when they expect to hear from the company, and they'll say, oh, I applied yesterday, I should hear within the next week. You know how crazy that is for all of those candidates. But the reality is that's a set of expectations. So we do know from Psych 101 that if you have expectations and they aren't met, it has an impact on you. So that becomes one of those kind of interesting sets of issues. So I ask recruiters, what is a candidate? And I will tell you that for the most part, it's all over the map. But my definition of a candidate is anyone who expresses interest. Okay? I tend to want to look at it as a candidate would look at it. And so I'm measuring that sentiment, I'm measuring that expectation, I'm measuring that experience from the moment they begin researching the company, which is even before they become a candidate, because I'm interested in what drives the decision to actually apply, through when they apply and the experience they have of applying, the extent to which they're now touched by the company in a variety of ways, through a phone screen, through interviews, through the interview day, any assessments. I'm interested in the experience that they have and the impact that that has on them. And I'm also interested in the onboarding process. So it's a pretty broad view of the data that I want to collect and examine, but I'm convinced that it has and can be aligned to the success of the company. I've always been a believer of that, but that's like tilting at windmills for a long time. Now I have the data to prove it. And so there's a lot more that we can take a look at, and more that you can arm them and yourselves with as well. And I think that's important. Yes?
It's okay to ask a question.
Anytime.
Okay, so I make leaps of logic sometimes. I want to talk about something you said just a little bit earlier about unmet expectations.
Right.
And this big buzzword, employee engagement.
Yeah.
Seems to be, I'm wondering how unmet expectations eventually affect employee engagement.
I think we will be able to do that. I'm making in fact, next week, I will be in Dallas with Great Places to Work. I have a meeting with the new president of Great Places to Work. The old president, China Gorman, just left. But Great Places to Work measures, in part, employee engagement as part of what they do. It's not the only thing. They're not the greatest in the world necessarily. They're really a wonderful company. But there's very few companies other than they who go out into the field and say, you have to give us a random sample of 100 of your employees that we're going to ask us to fill out a survey, and anonymously they can do it, and we're going to use that as a significant portion of whether or not you're the 100 best companies in America to work for. So I want to be able to align the data I'm collecting about the experience up to the employment to that employment engagement, because I believe a reasonable hypothesis is if I engage you in the recruiting process, then when you start, you are more ready to put all of the things that you're bringing to the table to test. If I screw with you throughout all of that period of time, and sort of hand you the job in a way that makes you uncomfortable, then you're going to be holding back from day one or looking for the next job, right? At the same time, I would also hate to help companies who have an extraordinary candidate experience to join a company that sends people to hell as workers. Think about that. You know, it's that old joke where you die and go to St. Peter and they say, hey, you have to check out hell and heaven first. And you choose hell and they tell you, well, yesterday I was recruiting. Today, you know, you're an employee. So I'm not into wanting to get that group of companies in my group, okay? Does that help? But we need to have the data. See, we can say this all day long, and it makes common sense. But if you're going to prove it, you need to show data that allows you to put dollar figures on that. And I can show you, I've worked with companies now in the last year using the data that we've collected, and they can demonstrate to their CFO satisfaction $1 million, $5 million, $10 million in cost or added value in terms of changing the way they treat candidates. That's huge. Yes?
Just a request to repeat the questions. The people on the
Yes.
video streams can't hear those, I guess.
So that question was about engagement, but you got it, but I'll do that ahead.
Yes, thank you.
All right, cool. All right, any others before we, okay, so, you know, kind of a conclusion on this piece is that there is a convergence about this candidate and customer kind of approach, but very few companies really are fully engaged around that at this point, but more are becoming sold, if you will, as we provide a better quality definition, as we map the practices, specific practices that will be more likely to impact the people that we don't hire from those that we do. Because the one thing we can't change is the fact that as a customer, for the most part, you can walk in a store and you choose to buy. So 99 times out of 100, the product is there. And the one time that it's not, they say, hey, you know, let me tell you where you can get it, right? Or let me take your name and number, I'll call you up when the next one comes up. You know, I mean, imagine that. It's like, oh, you're qualified for the job, you've gone through everything, next job we have, you're first in line. You get it. Now you're laughing, but Lockheed's doing that with a group of in one area. They can predict the likelihood of a given contract coming through, if you think about it, and they basically pre-recruit, pre-assess, and pre-hire with a written letter that you will get the job if we get the contract. Thank you very much. And about 80% of those who then get that within 6 months have accepted when the contracts come through, which puts people in the seat right away. So conceivably, there are examples where people are doing something similar, but we need to recognize that it's always going to be a little bit different. In our case, we're learning that 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the average company was getting about 85 resumes per job. Now, obviously, it's way different depending on level, size, type of company, and all that kind of stuff. You know that. That number this past year was 185 per job. So that tells you that I'm hiring one person and there is a lot of people I'm not going to hire, for sure. And it's not just how I treat the one, it's going to be now how I treat all of them, because they have a much greater aggregate impact on me as an employer for the future. And I can now measure it. Okay? Pretty cool stuff. So mapping and measuring are the critical issues that we're going to have to apply to this issue before we can really put a stake in this ground. And that's kind of what I'm intent on doing. All right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, we're talking about internal recruiters. We are not talking about third-party, or you're not talking about third-party recruiters.
So the question is,
No,
I'm not, I didn't mean it that way. I need to say what the question is.
Yes.
So we're talking about internal and external recruiters both, is the answer to this. However, there's some subtle differences, and I haven't solved all of them. right? So from the candidate's point of view, some candidates are sophisticated enough to know who they're talking to. Some candidates are not. They simply see this person as a representative of that company. And if they don't have coaches, I can assure you that most third-party recruiters represent themselves in the U.S. almost as if they were that third-party representative who is most held dear by the internal corporation. And I encourage candidates to ask the question, when was the last time you placed somebody in that company? You know, if they're talking to a third-party recruiter, and how often have you done that in this particular job? And by the way, if you say you did that last month, I'd like to talk to that person. So my point is that there are a lot of problems, but in the U.S., only about 3% of large companies' hires come from third party, come from external recruiters. Why? Because they charge a lot. And if I'm heading up a recruiting operation like I did at Johnson & Johnson years ago, I went to, and we were talking about this earlier, I went to my recruiting staff and said, every once in a while, it's important to use a third-party recruiter because of the complexity of the job, the scarcity of that particular job, the amount of resources we would have to apply in order to recruit them from our operation. But if on a regular basis I'm paying for a third-party recruiter for your openings, then why am I paying you? I have no need to pay you. In fact, I'm going to try and hire that sucker to come in and replace you. Because that doesn't make any sense, does it? So in the United States, we tend to be a little bit more efficient about that issue. In the United Kingdom, 5 years ago, based on the best evidence I have, 60 to 70% of all jobs, from hourly to executive, came in through third party. Recruiters in companies basically called the third party and said, would you send people over? And we're paying tens of millions of dollars for third-party recruiting to take place. In the last 5 years, between LinkedIn and a few other things, I don't want to go crazy on this, more and more companies are looking at replacing their internal recruiters who knew how to make a phone call to internal recruiters who know how to source and screen and all of the other kinds of things, and they're declaring in their messaging that they're not using third party. And some of the big financial services groups, like, I'll give you one example, JP Morgan Chase, went from 40% of all their hires coming in through third party to 5% in 1 year, 2 years ago. So as you move outside the United States, there's a lot of differences in terms of how recruiting takes place, which is why I spend time going into weird places in different countries and living with recruiters to watch them recruit. So I can talk about 20 different countries and the cultural impact that it has. So UK is changing significantly, but you know, in France, you just don't get a job. You're going to work for either Adecco or Manpower or whatever. You're just not going to be working for a company because they don't hire anybody anymore. So I have a lot of strong opinions about a variety of things. Ask me a question later, and I'm happy to tell you what I think. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about, and this will take us to the end. So when I finish this, we'll take a break. But I want to share with you some of the stories of companies who have switched on their light. You know, they said, oh, something's wrong here. We need to fix this. They're not always fixing it in the right place, but here's what's true about all of the stories I'm going to tell you. Every one of them, if you add up all of their candidates are net positive. Their candidates who they do not hire are, in general, positive about them. Not all of them, because these are many of them are big companies. But the fact is, I find that extraordinary, because the net sentiment of for most companies of their candidates is not positive. It is pretty much negative. Okay? So these are some cool winners. NBC Universal and RMS are two companies that reflect the need of these companies to give information to their candidates before they apply. People are going, I don't understand these jobs. I want to know more about them. I need more depth, whatever. And they knew they didn't have the resources to be able to do this one-on-one, so they do it in different ways, but they're using chat rooms. And so you're going to see more and more of an evolution of the use of chat rooms, and these are just two good examples. Lockheed does it every week, for example, just for military. So they basically do a different kind of chat room. They invite military in transition to come to a chat room to talk about the jobs. Yes?
Where does one find about these chat rooms?
The career site. Yeah. That would be the best place, I would think. There is no, so the question is, where do you find out about that? And the answer is the career site of the company would be the best place. There is no resource that I know of where all in one place are all the chat rooms in the United States. I mean, how would you keep that up to date? That would be kind of tough. NBC Universal does 2 chat rooms a week. One is something called Tech Talk, which is really for technology-related jobs where people are invited to come and ask questions, and they have hiring managers as well as recruiters who talk to them. You know? Pretty straightforward. Another is Ask the Experts, so it's like other things about the job that you want to know. Our culture, you know, all of the different properties that we have, how we, you know, put that all together. People get confused. They want to know some of the organizational insides and outsides. So that's what they do there. RMS is a small company. It's called Risk Management Solutions, and they hire a lot of PhD mathematicians. So very specialized people. And they aren't well known. So they want to kind of engage PhDs almost on a one-to-one basis. So they run a chat room every single day. Sometimes no one comes. Sometimes people come. Sometimes there's a bunch of people. I've snuck in on several occasions and asked some pretty stupid questions because they claim, and they execute on this, that if you bring honest questions, we have honest answers. Well, that's good. I got a lot of honest questions to ask. Let's just see how far we can take this. So, yeah, how many female PhD mathematicians have you hired in the last 5 years, and where are they now? That's an awkward question. They answer it. They know the answer. They've heard that question before. After a while, you know the kind of questions that could get asked, right? What happened to that last person in that job? And they'll tell you. I find this pretty interesting because it's a very powerful sense of whether or not there's a transparency going on, right, within the framework of that company. But they fully engage people. They have a bunch of other things, too. They have a simulation. They basically have made a deal with a game company that creates a risk management game that they tell any candidate at the PhD level that they must play the game before they apply. And if they like the game, they should apply. If they don't like the game, they shouldn't apply. I like that. I think it's great. It's kind of a self-assessment tool. But the upshot is people are asked in that game to do a kind of a risk assessment of a scenario similar to the kinds of things that this company does for insurance companies, et cetera. So they're behind the scenes. So that's pretty cool. Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, T-Mobile, and actually Corning are 3 companies that are putting expectations up a little bit more effectively than other companies. PNNL says, we're making a pledge to every applicant who applies, this is how we will treat you. So it's one thing to treat people well. It's another thing to say, you come to Northrop and we either have the product or we'll walk you over to the store that does. Right? So, you know, if I'm doing have a goal at a company, my boss tells me, step up. What are you going to do this year? You know, you're going to do this, 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 and this. Okay, you do those things. You can keep your job. We can give you a bonus. We can do whatever. We need to do more of that, and very few companies are beginning to set expectations. What you're seeing is more expectations being set about, okay, if you get to the interview stage, we do panel interviews, right? So you're seeing more of that being explained out there, and so they don't necessarily need a coach to do that, but you should be telling them, look at that, by the way. I'll help you figure out how to deal with a panel interview. Yes, you had a question.
Yes, so when was this launched, and have they measured before and after the process started, and what is the difference?
So the question is, when was this launched, and have they done any really good measuring? And the answer is, it's been launched. PNNL has been out for about four or 5 years doing this. T-Mobile loved what PNNL does, and they started doing that. Corning also took off on what PNNL is doing, and none of them have measured anything other than, yeah, I know, you're looking at, people don't measure really well. I'm measuring. So
That could be a strong point for them to point out.
I agree. Listen, I'm with you. I want them to measure themselves, but here's what I am doing. I'm measuring them because their candidates are telling me how good their experience has been. They believe that this is a piece of that. I can't link it directly. This is one of the things they're doing, but their candidates in general are positive. Obviously, if you're doing this, you're trying to deliver on this, right? Because if you don't deliver on this, it's not going to be really good. So that's a couple things that we're doing. There is one others, and that is Sage, is an Atlanta company that makes some software. And if you apply to them, they basically say, look, it's going to take 5 minutes to do this application, which is a pretty big statement from an expectation point of view. The cool thing is when you press submit, a little window pops up and it asks you, how long did it take you? And the answer you give goes directly to the head of staffing. They also tell you that you will hear from a recruiter at Sage about your application within 20 days. You got to imagine, that's pretty cool. Now, I don't know why 20 days, but that's what they decided. And certainly it's not, we will resolve this and hire people within 20. But on the 20th day, their system automatically sends to everybody who applies an email that says, did you hear from a recruiter? And the answer to that goes directly to the head of staffing. And every recruiter knows that that loop is there, right? So that is also another example, not only of expectation, but measurement, okay? And that's the kind of measurement we really need to build in, is instant and real time, because that's that's the kind of world we're in now. Yes, question?
On the slide, when it says had measurable effect, is that based on your?
T-Mobile, yeah, with T-Mobile has a candidate care team, and they believe that not only from our data, but also that they have now started or instituted doing a candidate experience measurement, that there is an impact here. But is it causal? It's questionable. Okay, it's certainly relational. I think we could get into that, and that's a whole other side of the discussion, right? And let me stop there in terms of measurement. There's one other key issue about customers. I don't know you're aware of. Fred Reichhold, who wrote a great article in the Harvard Business Review in 2003, one measure that you must do, is the person who, in a sense, invented and described Net Promoter Score. Some of you are aware of that, some of you are not aware of that. But in our colleagues, the marketing side of the world, that was a sea change. For the last 12 years, marketing has stopped talking about what they think people should be doing, and has started measuring the sentiment of customers, the loyalty of customers, and tried to correlate the numbers that they're getting from a single question to the impact it has on the corporation. We haven't done that in recruiting or in coaching or in anything of late, but we will be doing that. And for the last 4 years, I have been doing that using a similar approach, and I'll talk to you about that later a little bit more. But fundamentally, you should realize that the world is shifting heavily to evidence measures, and if you are not collecting them in some systematic way, you need to start thinking about that. And I would encourage you, even among your clients, is to have some mechanism that they give you some sentiment of what you have done for them, the extent to what you have done to them has connected them to the success of what they're doing, and I think that will help differentiate your service long term. We're going to have to show numbers no matter what. Yeah.
So there's no longitudinal study that's saying that if this company gives this favorable candidate experience and hires the candidate, that that person has a long tenure with that company?
Right.
We haven't
So,
gone that far.
so the question is there a longitudinal study? And the answer is there are no longitudinal studies related to the experience of the candidate. There are longitudinal studies about employee engagement and its connection to performance if it's measured a certain way. Gallup has been doing that. USLID, who was at Rutgers but now is at Northwest, who wrote the book about HR Scorecard, has been doing that. So there are some studies, longitudinal studies, but they're all internal. No one's really been doing any research on what I'm talking about until the last 4 years. And I will tell you, so I'm very proud of the fact that this month, the first doctoral dissertation on candidate experience is being defended at the University of Arkansas on our data from two years ago by Stephen Shearman, who is a director of recruiting for Walmart. And so part of that, and I'll share some of what he's going to be doing, and I'll be on a panel with him next week at the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology. And I'm happy about that too, because it's the first time we're at an academic conference, and we had to get vetted by 3 PhDs in order to present at the conference. So that was pretty cool stuff. So the answer is it's starting now. You think it should have started 50 years ago, it's starting now. All right. Capital One is doing the best job in measurement in the United States, and it's having extraordinary impact. So what Capital One is doing is, in their card division, they ask every single person who applies every single month within 3 days of when they close the job. So they close the job, they send you an email saying, hey, sorry, close the job, you didn't get the job. Something along those lines. And then 3 days later, they send you a note saying, we're really trying to improve our how we treat candidates, no matter whether we hire or not. We have 16 questions. We would love you to complete this. 10,000 people are asked this every month. 80% respond. 80% respond. Now, there's a couple tricks to how they do that, and I've pinged them on a couple of those tricks because there's sort of an incentive around some of that. But they also have an analyst who looks at this data, slices and dices it by job level, by job family, by location, and by recruiter. Every recruiter has a dashboard. On the dashboard is an index for their candidate experience, an index for hiring manager satisfaction, and the extent to which they've moved to meet their service level goals, if you will. So there's all that data right up there. They've moved their equivalent net promoter score from the 40s, which is extraordinary, to 55, which is unfreaking believable. There is nobody at their level in terms of what they're doing. What are they doing? A lot of things, but what is the cool thing that they're doing? They're holding recruiters accountable for candidate experience. That is what they're doing. Okay. So they're doing some fascinating things, and Christina McClung, who has been responsible for that, is someone that I tend to get in front of people on a regular basis. And maybe sometimes she's in Washington, so perhaps sometimes she might be an interesting character to talk about in terms of what they're doing.
So that's somewhat of a meta model then when you mentioned holding the recruiter accountable. So the people that you hire to hire people are
Yeah.
important.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes, they're very important because they'll screw you or help you or, you know, overloaded. You know, the average rec load of a recruiter is about 28 in general. Not obviously if they're dealing with executive levels. But think about that for a second. I don't have just your job to fill. I got all these other jobs to fill, and I got 185 people on average for all of them. That's thousands of people that I'm going to have to deal with in some way, shape, or form, and it's easy for me to get screwed up. You know, when do I actually work on the details of updating all of this stuff? You know, it's Friday afternoon, I want to go home. So don't get me started. I can really go crazy on some of that. Accenture has created an app that recruiters send out to candidates that helps them prepare for interviews.
I have a question.
Yes.
So this is my question.
Yes.
Clearly, a recruiter can't do all this by themselves. Clearly, it's a system issue. They have to have a system in place. The Accenture's doing it, the Lockheed is doing it. They must have a system in place to help these recruiters be successful in this onboarding or whatever kind of experience that the candidate is having.
So you're asking, they must have a system in place. They do. It's a bad system, but they have it in place. There is no good system. So, I mean, if you want to get into what's wrong with Taleo, or, you know, any one of the pieces of the system, we can talk about that at some point. So save that for the end. But the reality is the systems don't talk to each other really well. And so recruiters often are trying to figure out how I move from this system to that system to this system so that I can put the pieces together to actually take some kind of action, which drives them nuts.
Yeah, so my response, I guess, is that, until, and I don't mean like an electronic system, I mean a process.
Right. Yeah. Set of protocols.
Yeah,
Right. Right. And many companies have that map, and it looks really, really good. So you try to actually go from this box to that box. So we can get into that. I mean, you know, OD was my thing. I really loved that kind of stuff, and I can draw really pretty maps. But what I'm into now is, okay, where is the choke point, right? And so we need to decide what we can do, and that's the most critical thing. And so I focus on very specific practices that impact the candidate. And yes, there's a lot of stuff behind it. That's their problem. You figure out how to set priorities, and they'll be focused on, is really the key. So Accenture built as I said, an app, which is kind of neat. Genentech requires every candidate who's going to come in for an interview to take interview training. Every candidate, because they want everybody to be at a given level. Now, that's still aspirational, right? Because not everybody can be trained well within that framework. We know that they're not giving them a lot of practice or any of those kinds of things, but the fact is, at least they're trying to say aspirationally, look, you all should at least know these things about coming in and taking an interview, as opposed to saying, we give behaviorally based, you know, interview questions. You know, because you go, really? No kidding. Has anybody audited any of those hiring managers about doing any of that? No, not really. Bozzuto is cool because it's a small company down here in the, I think it's in Maryland. And very modest, very small. And the CEO came into the head of HR one day and said, I've been looking at Glassdoor. And there's some really weird comments being made about Bozzuto. said, what's up with that? So she says, you know what? I can create an agent so that every comment made by a candidate or a employee will go directly to you. He goes, oh, cool. Would you do that? Thank you. And then she went to all the C-level, all the directors that reported to the CEO and said, hey, I set up an agent for Joe. Would you guys like to get the same thing Joe's getting? Yeah. They all said, we want that. We don't want him to see something that might have been about us. So they did that. So she then made sure she saw it too. And once a month when she goes to the board, one of the things she does is she goes, oh, and we've had 8 different comments from candidates about these kinds of things. And in order for us to improve on that, I'm going to need this. She's not been turned down yet. You got to love that. You know, that's a great strategy on that. PepsiCo just finished a challenge to interns all over the United States in any college, and basically said, look, we have targeted colleges. We haven't been hiring a lot of people not in targeted colleges, but we will offer a free internship. Not a free internship. We will offer an internship, paid internship, to anybody who can help us better think about how to use social media with music conferences for these products. So come up with a plan, come up with a creative idea for how we can combine social media, music, and Frito-Lay. Had 10,000 responses. Ended up with some extraordinary stuff. And ended up hiring 6, I think, interns as a result that they would not ordinarily have hired as a result of that. But the visibility in terms of making that available in kind of a fair way had an extraordinary impact in terms of the feedback and the sentiment that they were measuring as a result of that. Deloitte and Intel are 2 companies that spend a lot of time actually researching candidates, their candidates. One has a candidate care team, and Deloitte just did a major 3,000 person survey. Before they changed their career site, they wanted to say, well, how well are we meeting the candidates' needs for information as opposed to what we think they need? Why don't we ask them? This was a real aha moment, I think. So it was kind of cool. I really like that. And Hyatt, they have a well-developed guest experience that they teach every single employee how to execute on. And in fact, your performance is based on executing on the guest experience, right? And they said aha moment for them was maybe we should take what we do with that guest experience and turn that into a candidate experience. And so they began doing that. And what they discovered was that they need, if they really want to hire the best people, they need to actually introduce their candidates who come in to real employees doing those jobs at an earlier stage in the recruiting process. And so they've made that shift, and that's made a difference in some of what they're measuring. And the last is MetLife. They use a simulation built by a company called Shaker Consulting Group out of Cleveland, Ohio, that essentially takes a year, 2 years. Wegmans just launched something similar as well, where a candidate kind of embeds themselves in a simulation, a series of vignettes in which they visually experience engaging, for example, a customer, and then it stops and asks them, hey, what would you do? And offers them choices. So you go through this for about 40 minutes, and 2 things happen. One, I have a better sense as an employer whether or not you and I should keep talking, and you have a better sense of whether you really want to do this. And what's really interesting about the results of this is they're finding that the candidates that they do not hire or who now withdraw from from any further application because they go, oh, really? I don't want to do that. Are actually going out of their way to engage their friends who they think will want to do that. And so there's a viral increase in terms of referral rate. Everybody get that? Interesting stuff. Yes. Last couple questions and then we're going to stop.
I hate to stop.
We are going to stop.
I know, but we'll stop and be very quick. My question is there any common denominator that you've identified amongst these companies that are taking the lead in enhancing the candidate experience?
Yes, that's part two.
Oh, okay.
So the question was, what's common about all of these? Isn't that wonderful? That's exactly how I set this presentation up. Thank you for the segue. But that will be, we'll take a break. Yes, anything else?
No, my question deals with the ones who give the acts to help candidates to apply for jobs.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see whether they do any type of metrics on the back end to see how long that particular person.
I haven't had a chance to ask them. I think that it's been relatively new, and but I have access to them, so it's in my head to follow up. But most of what people are doing is relatively in the last year or two. Number one, if they did it, it was sort of like before that. It was sort of like catch as catch can, but not systemic. And most of these companies have fewer resources, or just emerging resources in analytics. So, I'm seeing more companies with talent acquisition or HR hiring serious scientists who have analytics capabilities. That's a very big deal these days, obviously, for big data, and it's happening, but not in huge numbers yet. The companies like Nike, Amazon, Disney, Pepsi, etc., are doing this. And now measuring these kinds of things. So they're measuring, for example, how many applications are mobile. Companies that are mobile enabled now, and there's not a lot, companies that are mobile enabled are experiencing 50% or more of all of their applications being mobile enabled, being done by mobile devices. So think about that for a second. If you're not helping them create that and do that, that will be a mistake. Does that help? Okay, one last question, then we'll take a break.
Thank you. I was wondering, from the companies that you've done focus groups with,
Yes.
how many of them have been huge and how many of them have been small? I work with a lot of people in the nonprofit field.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering if you also collect data from smaller companies and nonprofits, and if you see any differences.
We haven't gotten enough data from enough nonprofits. So you can help me get more nonprofits participating. So if I don't have their data, I can't break it out, right? I'm going to show you some demographics of the employers who participated. My focus groups really, when I talked about focus group, that was my business, working with very large companies. But in terms of the Candidate Experience Awards, there's a strong distribution across all areas. I think that the model doesn't work if the company doesn't hire at least, 10 to 20 people a year. Once you start getting into, 40, 50 or more people a year, you start needing some kind of systemic way of doing it. And since this survey really delves into all of these different touch points and practices, it really starts to be relevant at that point. Okay, great. So let's take a break. Thank you.
All right, 5 minutes, everybody, so that we can come right back and enjoy Jerry.
Are we having fun? Okay, that's good.
Okay, everybody, if you can take your seats again, we're going to get started. I hope that everybody is finding all of this information as fascinating as we are. So for those of you on the live video stream, whether you're in Australia or Singapore or Norway or what other countries am I forgetting? Canada, I can't remember, Spain. For those of you in the UK, I hope that you're enjoying this as much as we are. So let's get started again so we don't miss a moment of Jerry.
Thank you. Life is good.
You hear that a lot, right?
You know, at some point you have to be comfortable with your stuff. You guys are coaches. It's very nice to be. I'm usually with recruiters, and I've been a recruiter for a long time. They're yelling at me like I've got to actually have this thing on. Yes, so we have it on now. So that's good. But speaking is one that you have to be comfortable with yourself, as most of you know. And so half of your challenge is helping your clients get comfortable with just being who they are in a very awkward and often artificial kind of situation. And I learned, fortunately, a long time ago to just stick with what I really care about, what I'm really passionate about, and then it's up to you to deal with whatever comes out of what I've got to share. So that's kind of how I deal with it, and I get a little bit more uncomfortable when I'm, in front of 500-600 people. And there was one SHRM conference where I was talking about HR and the internet many years ago. I've been doing this for over 20 years. So my first talk was in 1996, and the subject was HR and the internet. And there was more than, 1,500 people in the room. And I asked how many had an email address, and about a quarter of them had an email address. I said, how many of you have seen a page on the internet? And about 1 in 10 in June of 1996. And I said, well, I'm going to talk about what I think might happen with human resources in compensation and employee relations and recruiting in the next few years because of this thing called the internet. And I showed pages and went through all of that, and it was like deer, in the headlight kind of thing, and it was just absolute dead silence, and at the end I kind of said, so you have to decide whether you want to embrace this or go get another job. I said, but you're not going to have choices here. And I think that's still true. But we've obviously weeded out those who cannot embrace technology, at least parts of technology, because you can't get your work done without it. You can't communicate without it. Years ago, I would have asked recruiters, I said, how many jobs did you fill without the use of a phone? And they'd have to think for a while because, a phone has to be used somewhere. In almost every single job, even hourly jobs that were walk-ins, at some point you have to call people back up and say you got the job. So you can't operate without a phone to recruit. And today, I will tell you, you could use you could say, if you said smartphone, that's a different thing. But if you said a phone, making a call, no, you could actually fill a lot of jobs without a phone. But you cannot fill a job really without the internet in some way, shape, or form impacting. I did a quick exercise with my company group not long ago, in which I asked them, what if the internet went down? Explain to me how you would now shift to get work done. And I will tell you, you could not, because you can't get the information out of the system of just the people who are coming in for your interview. That's typically in a cloud, so you're not going to even reach the cloud, so you're dead. It would all stop. Anyhow, enough of that. So I want to tell you 4 things that all of those things have in common. And in fact, that all the companies have in common, to a greater or lesser extent, whose candidates that they didn't hire are positive about them. Okay? To fit that segue question that you had. There is at least 4 things that correlate highly at this point. And we have a fire hose of data, so there is more to come. I'll also tell you where you can get this stuff. But we'll wait for that in a minute. So the first, and none of this, by the way, is rocket science. So if you're looking for some kind of silver bullet no one ever heard of, this is just stating of the obvious. When companies actually listen to their candidates, to the extent that the candidate believes they're listening, they're rated higher. Everybody's going, yeah, well, that's like so obvious. We asked candidates, were you invited by the company you just applied to provide feedback about your experience? How many said yes? 15. Okay, so while this is so obvious as to be unbelievable, 85% of the companies just have not gotten in the habit of doing it. Some of those 85 think they're doing it, but they're really not. They're not asking it in a way that they can be doing it. Now, obviously, asking for feedback is one thing. Demonstrating that you're listening takes us to a higher level, right? In terms of being able to share back, here's what I heard. And being, yeah, that's what I was telling you. And agreeing that we should do this. So that's a key issue. But the companies that do this better are, in fact, demonstrably rated better in a way that I can measure. And that's the important thing. I can measure the difference. Second is companies that set expectations are measured better. So even if it's little things, like if you get as far as coming in for an interview, here's a list of all the things you should think about from an interview point of view. We will let you know in advance. We will do this. We will do that. You will have a panel interview. You will expect to be here for 6 hours, or whatever it might be, that we could set expectations ahead of time. We will be ranked higher if you didn't get the job, which is pretty cool. We asked the question, was there anything you wished you knew about the job before you applied? And before you interviewed, before you whatever, right? So just before you applied, we asked. So, wow, so you mean here they're actually asking the question of candidates, what kinds of things should I tell you so that you would be more inclined to apply if you're qualified, less inclined to apply if you're qualified, more likely to be able to make a better decision. So we asked 95,000 people this question. And we want to know how many, I didn't put it up there, although it's on your slides. 38,000 answered that question with a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, and tomes of information. We have ebooks of data. So I'm in the process of taking all of that. I found a cool startup in San Francisco that has the ability to take all of that stuff, 38,000 text messages, if you will, and put them in a big bucket and then mix them up and tell me a little bit about sentiment, frequency, all of those kinds of things, right? So we're learning something from that, but just putting it into a cloud, what do you think is in the center of the cloud in very big, bold letters? What one thing are they all saying? No, they're not saying transparency. What is it, in answer to this question, was there anything you wished you knew about this job, okay, that you applied to from this company before you applied? That would be mine, but that's not the answer. You had the answer, salary. In big, you know, if you put it into a cloud, there'd be little things like supervisor and, you know, where the job is and, you know, some various things, the hours of it, whatever. But big and bold is salary. You know, if you had a product and you were putting it out and people were walking into the store and then walking out because, I don't know the price of any of this, so obviously it's very expensive. You have, you know, you would think that you would learn from that. And corporations have the most extraordinary cognitive dissonance around this issue in our culture than anybody I've ever seen in my life. I had an hour conversation earlier this week with the head of sourcing for Microsoft on this very thing. And they've got more, it's not worth spending the time to go through it, but they got more reasons why not, none of which hold any water whatsoever. Because obviously, you drive me right over to Glassdoor, Salary.com, or my coach and say, how the hell do I find out what this is, you know, going to be worth? You know, and who can I call? So it is something we need to learn to do more. Wells Fargo is the only company I know of where you can go and ask to see all of the recruiting jobs, for example, and what comes back is the different recruiting jobs they have in different parts of the country and their salary range. It's the only commercial job that I know. Government jobs obviously do it, and in Europe you see much more of willingness to share this kind of information. This is the one piece that has the single highest correlation to a rating. And it has to do with getting up to bat. And it's represented by this question: how satisfied were you with your ability to present your skills, knowledge, and experience during the application, let's say, or during the interview, or during the screen? And it has to do with the theory of perceived fairness, which is a relatively academic theory. But now we've taken that theory, and Stephen Shearman is looking at that in relation to what are the actual practices, what actually happens that impacts my perception that I fairly got up to bat and swung, even if I didn't get the job. And this captures a piece of that. So if, for example, a company has an application that says, at the very end, last question, is there anything we didn't ask you about your skills, knowledge, and experience? Because remember, the headset of most employers is, what do I want to know about you so that I can make a better decision? As opposed to, what do you think you got that you're bringing to the table? Now, great recruiters will probably throw that in somewhere, but not necessarily always in every case, and not so clearly. That I want to hear, and I want to demonstrate I'm listening to you telling me about what you think is important. Yeah.
So this is where, on the career side, the onus would be on the candidate to make sure that the interview is 50-50. So
Yes.
They're verifying that they're getting what they think they get, not just what
If you're a coach, I think there's no excuse for not insisting that your client tell them, if not asked, what it is they think that the employer should be assessing or weighing about their skills, knowledge, and experience. If they walk out saying, I didn't tell that, and so woe is me, that I didn't get a fair shot, kick them in the butt. I mean, the point is, that's because they're your client. But the reality is most people don't have coaches. So most people don't get that. So most people leave maybe feeling that, maybe not feeling that, but if they feel that they did not get up to bat, I can assure you the rating is lower. If they feel they got up to bat, I can assure you the rating is higher. And I've had a couple discussions recently, I have not written about it, but I see this as connected to the cover letter. Candidates, if you think about it, at least from my perspective of what we do, is that the cover letter often was my interpretation of the 3 or 4 things in the resume and what I know about you that is the best connection. So I'm kind of putting forward a couple key things that you should be weighing as part of my interest in your job, right? Even if you upload cover letters these days, no recruiter's reading them. At best, they get in front of the hiring manager at the moment that the person's coming in most cases. Maybe you can get somebody to bring it in and they read all of that. I get that. That's always positive, and that is always the right thing if you can make that happen. But again, that's the skill in networking and moving your data in through a back door, etc. That's not everybody. So from a systems point of view, essentially we're putting data into a computer-based system, and that computer-based system is being sliced and diced and reorganized and repurposed for a choice of who gets in on a given day. So that's the big area that you got to overcome. And so in my opinion, the only way of overcoming that in the application process is with a specialized question that almost opens up the cover letter opportunity. Does that make sense? Anyhow, that's kind of where my thinking is on that. So this is a very big deal, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this again, but let me go to the last. Accountable is the other. Remember I talked about Capital One. And that's basically it. We asked this question of employers: how is the candidate experience connected to recruiter performance? And this weird little piece here is 18.7% said, not at all. We don't connect it to anything. That's not what we're about. We're about putting bodies in seats. Informal review, it's a formal, but no measurement is taken. Formal, no incentive, no monetary incentive. And the last one is 16% said, we're fully connected, like Capital One. Recruiters know that this is part and parcel of what we expect of them, and we measure it, and we connect it to performance, and their bonus, their ability to continue working, etc., is in part based upon that. And we can say that when you do that, all along that spectrum, the more you do, the more accountable you hold recruiters, the more likely candidates are rating you positive, when in fact, this is not rocket science, right? I mean, how hard is this to create that hypothesis? Not hard at all. But my point is, I can now show how much the difference is, and we can put a price tag on that. That's where we can do something a little bit different. So any questions about those 4? Because I'm going to go into a couple other things that are more specific in terms of interviews and applications and so on, but anything? No? We're good?
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
Coming in hot from the virtual world.
Yes.
What's the best app used by recruiters to review resumes? What do you see out there that recruiters are using app-wise to review resumes?
That's a good question. So I'll repeat the question. What is the best app that recruiters are using to review resumes? I would be honest with you. I don't believe that recruiters are reviewing resumes. I believe
Select them. Is there an app they're using?
I don't think they're selecting them. I don't think they're anything. When a recruiter is engaging to determine who will come in, a recruiter, and I'm also going to qualify this. I'm not talking about executive search. Okay? Executive search still uses the old tried and true traditional whatever. They want your resume, they want your cover letter, they want everything that you can give them, your profile. They'll pull stuff down from the internet and then they'll write their own damn thing. So, yes. So let's get below that where the millions of people are getting hired, you know, your techies or whatever. And I will tell you, I want an app that literally eats all of that, consumes the resume, consumes the LinkedIn profile, consumes and scrapes from Guild what's been talked about in GitHub or wherever people have a footprint, and I want that to give me a sense of the relative ranking of the 25, 35, 150 people who are coming in. So I want to consume everything, and so the resume has to be put into a system that it can be consumed.
And there's not any mobile apps doing that right now?
None particularly. There are a bunch of tools out there like Intello, Guild, and others. Most of them are focused on the technology side of the house. But increasingly, Jive, a few others, are beginning to scrape from multiple sources. So there's probably half a dozen of those. But I could give you a list. If somebody sends me an email, I'll send you back a list of those. Okay? Yes?
You're saying the cover letter's not dead, is that right?
At an executive level, absolutely not dead, in my opinion.
It's changed in
I do not know. I know tens of thousands of recruiters. I know none who read cover letters. None.
But would they read the resume if it didn't come in with the cover letter? Even though they're not reading the cover letter?
That's an interesting point. That was that question was, would they read the resume if it didn't come in with a cover letter? There are companies that would reject on that basis for a given job type. And yes, as a coach, I would suggest examining that potential for the kind of clients you might have. That I think is a very good point. There are biases that we all have, and some people act on them regardless of whether it's in their best interests or not. Do I think that's a great company to go work for? No. If that's part of their recruiting process, then I'm scared to death about what's going on in the rest of the company. But that's a whole different set of issues, right? For the most part, even some systems now are being configured to eliminate even requesting cover letters. In the old days, it would be pretty standard that you could upload your resume, it would be parsed, and you would see all of the fields filled in, and then the dumb system would ask you all the same questions over again until you really got upset. And those things drive me absolutely nuts, and it still happens. So, yeah. License. So yeah, it's still out there. Interesting point. Thank you. It's a good qualifier. It's a good qualifier. So it suggests then that you need to be very thoughtful about how and when the cover letter is going to be used, and not to expect that the cover letter, when it gets lost in the system, is going to be useful, that it's going to be read in a way that makes a sense or makes a difference. It may be much more valuable as an adjunct when you're able to reach directly to the hiring manager and to the person. So from a networking point of view, I get the use of all of the things that you're telling them. But when you're putting into the system, they shouldn't have the assumption that it's being used the way they think. Recruiters are going to repurpose it just the way they want. And in some cases, they do it very poorly, but fundamentally they're not putting as much effort into it as you have. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I sometimes tell candidates, say, like, stop sending this week long on the cover letter. No one's even gonna read it.
No, my point is there's nothing that's true or not true 100% of the time. So using appropriate judgments, I think, is really important.
You said something very important, is that it's changing, and if you can go one-on-one and put it in the body of an email and powerfully engage with a human,
Right.
in that, it may get them to the resume. So that's something.
Yeah, let me
that's a great
stop and give you a piece of data. I gave it last year. I did not include it in this, and it's an adjunct, so it's part of the data that I get, but it relates specifically to the question that you're asking, and that is the person who becomes your champion inside. Obviously, if you can make friends of a hiring manager, I mean, God bless, right? So if you can find the hiring manager, engage them, they know you, etc., that's wonderful networking. Good for you. If you have somebody that you absolutely has been a person that you've worked with all your life, they went ahead of you to this other company, you now want to go to this company, and they become your internal champion because they can say, I recommend you, I would fall on the sword for you, the quality of your work is equal to the quality of my work, and I'm, a high pot, whatever. So, I mean, if you can do those things, that's fabulous. So I'm not talking about that kind of networking. What I am talking about is an artifact, really, of how you get jobs in today's world. And it has to do with a referral. A referral is not a recommendation in the United States. In other countries, it is. And in other countries, it's a very different approach. But in the United States, it's not. A referral is really a level of affinity requested by the company, typically, to, as an employee, give me people who you can refer. And we have many different ways of doing that and rewarding and incenting that. So what's missing, however, is that there's not much effort on the part of the employer to actually engage candidates to realize how important that is, nor do they offer them any data that would help them. So for example, if I told you we've got 5,000 people in our company and here's the breakdown of the colleges they went to, that would be interesting to you and to your client. If I said here is the breakdown of marketing or engineering in relation to the companies that they worked for prior to coming to this company, that would be helpful to you and to your clients. But they don't do that. On the other hand, I can do it. I have a recruiter's complimentary copy of LinkedIn, and I can see how many Ernst & Young people moved to Deloitte in the last year, 2 years, 5 years, and et cetera, et cetera. So I know exactly how that works, and I can be an advisor, right? So that data is sitting there. You should be doing that, right?
So a thought leader could provide that value and gain.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. If I were a coach, that would be one of the values I'd be dealing with. I'm not a coach, but you guys are.
Yeah.
So the data is there to do a lot more than you might think in terms of teaching them how to do this for themselves. Because when I ask them about doing this, starting with kids who are in school, are you on Facebook? Oh yeah. How many of the kids who graduated last year that you're connected to on Facebook are working for the company you want to work for? I don't know. Have you talked to any of them? No, I could do that? Yeah, you could do that. Dummy. So we have to learn that somewhere, and if you are making a living doing this, in my opinion, this is the time. So here's the effect of this. So here is the result of doing this. Let's assume 100 people apply to the job, and we know it's more than that. 100 people apply for a job. 50% are unqualified. So we can eliminate, I can eliminate 50 people immediately and probably more, but I'm just doing averages for the moment. Of the 100, how many bothered to get a referral or were contacted by an employee? Of the 100 for an average job?
6.
You guys are better than most recruiters. Really, it's 4. So, and it might be 6, who knows, you know? So it's 4. Half are unqualified. I'm going to, and it's not half. It might be 1 out of 4 for the referrals, but the point is, let's say half. So that leaves 50 people, 2 of whom are referrals and 48 are not. Easy enough. So now my next effort is to move the 50 down to 5, right? Because I'm not presenting 50 people to the hiring manager. I'm sitting down with the hiring manager saying, here's 5 good people. And I maybe have phone screened them, I may have done any number of things, but the reality is I'm presenting 5 if I've got anything on the ball, and the hiring manager ideally should be saying yes. And maybe I have to go back and get 1 more or do something, adjust, but fundamentally, 100% of those 2 who are qualified are always in the 5. Always. 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 I am not going, if they're qualified, they're going to be there. The hiring manager, they got referred, I'll see them. You get that? You all get that, right? This is what you do. You make a living at it. So here's the point. I do numbers, though. What that means is that if I'm one of the 4, I have a 20% chance of getting the job. You do the figures, but it's, if I'm one of the 4, I have a 20% chance of getting the job. If I'm not one of those 4, my chances are 1.2%. Difference is 14 times. You have to work 14 times as hard to find a job without a referral. What lottery do you want to be in is what I tell job seekers, and then I say, go get a coach. You know, you need, because if you don't get this, you just got to do something else as a job seeker. But fundamentally, I don't believe anybody should apply so that's the person who conceivably is told, I have applied for this job, you did agree to be my employee referral, so I put your name in, or here's my resume for the system because your employee referral program requires that you put it in, or whatever it might be. So you work that piece of it. Fundamentally, that makes all the difference. And if I know of no other single practice that has more value. There are some on and off things. If you can screw up a resume, you can do whatever. All of the things that would knock you out, but there's nothing that will get you in more than that single practice, fundamentally. Does that make sense? Yeah. Question?
So, another word for referral might be networking?
Not networking. I mean, I get networking. Networking is something I do when I'm working. I want to do better. Okay? If I do need to network to get a referral. But it's a highly specialized type of networking. So when I come across folks who say, I was told to network, and they're wandering around to whatever meeting they can show up at, I go, oh man, why am I here? I don't want to be here. You know, because they're that clueless. And I have done pro bono discussions in those, and I'm very patient when I do, but it helps me understand that the base level of career management is not very high in this country, and we need a lot more coaches, is really my opinion, which is another reason why I'm here. Yeah?
The follow-up question would be, like, a referral would be from somebody within the company.
A referral would be with somebody within the company. When people want me to refer to the head of staffing, them, and I don't know their work, I don't know anything else, it doesn't really work anywhere. You know, the head of staff, and you go, what the hell are you doing, Crispin? You know, why would I want to see this person? You know, so it's got to be somebody in the company. That's where the connection is, that's where the affinity is, that's where the sense of responsibility is from a recruiter point of view, that one of my colleagues has made a referral and therefore I'm going to do this.
Well, wouldn't these relationships be developed organically in learning about the company? You would reach out to people as a...
You think.
You then find out what the deal is.
You think.
You develop relationships.
The finesse, the strategy, the tactics,
right.
All of that is on us. That's why we're
if I'm paying you, you should be able to teach me this stuff. You know, and all the nuances of doing that and doing that well, so that I'm fully engaged. I should be able to initiate. The only company that I know of that actually goes back to their employees and says, okay, tell me about this referral, is a company called DaVita out of, and I'm sure there are others, but a company called DaVita out of Denver. And they hire tens of thousands of folks, mostly in dialysis nursing. So it's not something you would normally come across. And what they've done over the last 4 or 5 years is they've examined what referrals turn out to be the best employees and what don't. And so rather than make the obvious assumption that everybody's much better when they're referred. And they've assigned point count to that. And much of that point count is logical. So the degree to which you worked with that person in the past and were able to see their work is critical. So that's a key issue. And what they've done is they've changed the process so that if you refer somebody and the point count is high enough, the recruiter is required to call that person back within 24 hours. Decide within 72 hours whether to move forward and let them know. And as a result, they've knocked, I don't know, somewhere between 15 and 19 days on their average hire time. So that's powerful. Let me give you a couple key things in this area, and then we can finish up. Last year, 200 employers participated in the Candidate Experience Awards, which was free to every employer. So if you have companies out there that are your clients, I would encourage you to get them involved in 2015. 150 employers were willing to go to round 2, which meant that they had to ask their candidates to confirm what they said they did, which I thought was pretty cool. A lot of them said, no, our lawyers won't let us do that because, we're uncomfortable. 95,000 of the candidates of those 150 employers finished a 20 to 40 minute survey about how they were treated, which was pretty powerful stuff. Fire hose of data, that's what I've been talking about for the last 2 hours. 62 of those companies, in fact, were measured. We measured their candidates as being net positive, some of which I've talked about specifically. We had a meeting in Chicago for all day. 250 companies actually flew in the night before, or leaders from companies flew in the night before. We had a one-day symposium on candidate experience throughout the day, case studies, all of that kind of stuff. We honored these companies for having a positive candidate experience. All of them would tell you we're not done, we got a long way to go, which is another characteristic of companies that are like that. There's another 100 companies whose names are not up there because their candidate experience wasn't very positive, and we promised never to mention their name again. But I admire them just as much because they looked in the mirror, they got a lot of data. All of them got data back for themselves, their practices, their candidates, and the benchmark of all of the practices that the candidates have. I'm not going to spend much time. I'm using a Net Promoter Score type mechanism, which basically asks the question, would you refer others, given your experience, to this job? And using that single question, I can differentiate not just the ones that do bad and good, but even among the good, I can see a dispersion of companies doing better and better and better, and now we're in the midst of calculating why. Okay, so we're getting there, but we've got more to go. There's a lot of information about the demographics of who participated, so it's pretty equal, male and female. We didn't find a lot of differences in experience based on gender alone. On the other hand, we're not asking some questions I would like to ask women, for example, about their experience in getting hired, that if I did, fewer companies would participate because their lawyers would not let them, because then it might be discoverable. But that's another story for another day. Services, technologies, this is kind of a distribution of the types of companies. Nonprofit, you see that one, it's very small. You're in charge. Go get a bunch of companies to join this. It's free, so, you know, it's not hard. Resources in talent acquisition are all, range from very small numbers to large numbers, and a normal distribution in terms of the candidates by age and by generation. Couple differences by age and generation, but not as much as you might think. We got into, and you have available, if you download the 65-page boring report. I have an ebook on the candies.org that includes lots of these kinds of charts that show where different generations, for example, are using proportionately to look for a job different kinds of, in this case, social media tools and job boards, from CareerBuilder and Indeed to LinkedIn, Glassdoor, etc. So if there's some things that you want to look at, you can. Yeah?
I was just going to say, please repeat the name of that website, candies.org.
I'm going to have, the last slide has it in big bold, but it's the Candies, C-A-N-D-E-S, THECANDES.org. And you can download lots of stuff, but it's a lot of stuff.
What time of year, is it every, like, is it the same time every year when nominations begin?
Yeah, I don't want to go all the way back. The answer to that question is that we started in mid-March. We'll go to about mid-May in companies registering. I'm looking for 300 to 400 companies this year on a global basis, Europe as well. And then by June, between June and August, they will get their candidates. To do that, we'll give them some help in terms of a URL and everything else. And then we'll crunch all those numbers, and in September we'll have the symposium this year in Dallas. Okay? And I expect several hundred. Couple things that I think are useful. We have 2 or 3 minutes. Yeah?
We can have 5 extra.
Okay. I just saw where application got squunched over there. All right, well, never mind. Couple things that I think might be of interest to you. This is a distribution of how long it takes to fill out an application. Now, most of this was done on a computer. I'm now asking, did you do the application mobile or did you do it by computer? So that will shift. But you can see it's a fairly normal distribution, 16 to 60 minutes, and there is no correlation between the amount of time that it takes to complete an application and the rating that people give in terms of their experience. However, what happens during that time does impact, right? It's whether I feel I got up to bat, it's whether or not I knew in advance how long it would take, it's whether or not you help track. So those kinds of things tick people off, but time itself does not if you've set it up properly. When you measure, I think it's important to think about extremes rather than the whole range. Most of us are used to doing a Likert scale, 5-point scale, and saying, oh, okay, average is 3.1. Meaningless. The marketing folks and the Net Promoter Score approach basically take the two extremes, right? So they take the percent that are all the way over here and subtract it from the percent that's all the way over here, ignore all the middle, and that number, which could range from -100 to 100, is a better indicator. If it's positive, moving into high positives, you got things going. If it's negative, moving into negatives, take a closer look. Okay, so those are the things that we're kind of looking for at measuring things a little bit differently and using that. Again, we asked, how satisfied were you with the ability to present your skills, knowledge, and experience during the application? And we're seeing that if you were extremely satisfied that you were able to get that across, you were probably rating that company's experience as 5-star, and that's really the point of that. When we talk about interviews and screening, this is a detailed checklist of things that a company might do and follow. That's the point. You see that big negative red? You get it, right? Companies that do none of the above get rated really negative as a result. So companies with the discipline to have a process, just by having it, are doing a better job. In terms of candidate rejection, boy, that did get scrunched, didn't it? How interesting. How were you informed you were not going to get the job? You can see that middle one, but you can't actually read it. But on your slides, what it says is you got notification from a do not reply email. Okay, we can do better than that, and companies that tell your candidates that really aren't there yet from that point of view. And this is more complex. That's the only point of this slide, and that is the feedback that you're offered by a corporation is not always, it's not always good to be able to give feedback because sometimes your clients don't want it. Or the other thing is we haven't trained recruiters to give feedback. Think about that. And perhaps in some ways you could be representative to help them in that relationship where you have a relationship with the corporation. The fact is corporations are struggling around this issue. Recruiters, as is, are not trained to give bad news. They're trained to give good news. And they don't like giving bad news. And they have a lot of bad news to give. So they're not really good at that. It's a little more complex. I was encouraged to apply again. You see that spike over there. So a lot of companies are starting to rethink this, and I don't know where we're going to come out, but I think you're going to see a lot more data and a lot more experiences. Last is just to point out the business case. We asked, how likely are you to refer someone in the future? If you had a bad experience, a good experience, 78% of the candidates that didn't get a job would say, I would refer others. I'd go out of my way to refer others. How incredible is that? And of course, 40% would actively discourage others from applying if they had a bad experience. I could put numbers around that. I know what the cost is for that, and we've been working it out for some of the companies. How likely are you to apply again? 62% are extremely likely to apply again if they had a good experience, and if they had a bad experience, only 5% are extremely likely, and 24% will kill you for the rest of your life. They will never apply again. And I hear anecdotes from folks who say, 20 years ago when I was a student, this is how that company treated me. I don't use their damn product. I don't do this. I don't do that. Companies are starting to put those numbers together as well. Finally, how likely are you to share with your inner circle? And what we discovered is that if you're young or old, same thing, 4 to 6 people. So 82% will share positive now, 65% negative. And this, by the way, has increased, doubled, 100% increase in the last 4 years. How likely are you to share your experience publicly? And 51% will share a positive experience publicly, a third negative experience positively, and that's doubled as well. And this is where there's a gender issue. Millennials are less likely to share negative experience because they've had coaches tell them, don't burn your bridge, you dummy. And they've actually listened to that. How amazing. Whereas boomers don't care. You know, we're done. So I put some of this data together in a way that companies are able to put numbers on that, and that's the point of it. And hopefully that will help move the needle a little bit more. So my final comment is we are at a fork in the road. We have choices about which way we go. I think you should be helping your clients be more equal, be more fully partners in that decision process, engaging them in giving feedback, whether they like it or not, about the experience that they've had, because I think it will help generate where we go. I have a group of people involved in the Candy Bar who have won. These are companies that have won more than 1 year, 2 years or more, and they range from companies like Adidas or Adidas to T-Mobile, Wells Fargo, PepsiCo, etc. They give hours every month to increase our ability to do this. I have dozens of consultants from all over the United States. I have other consultants around the world, but there's now more than 100 people who are devoting 3 to 5 hours every month, volunteer time, no compensation, to improve and move this on a global basis. And I have a bunch of companies that have stepped up, whose arms I've twisted in some cases, but who stepped up and are giving us stupid amounts of money so that we do not charge employers to get this done. And so those are companies that I admire for their willingness, not knowing the extent to which they're going to get a big return on all of that. But it is a movement at this point, and hopefully you guys are really into that. So on that note, good hunting and thank you. I know we didn't leave any time at the end, but we had conversation and questions throughout, so, and I'll hang around.
And we'll also be on the tweet chat for those of you who are virtual and those of you who are here that want to participate in that while we eat our lunch. And we're at CTL Conf, and you've been very busy tweeting away, those of you that are here and those of you that are virtual, so thank you for doing that. Thank you, Jerry, and I was over there, I'd written on every little piece of paper I brought. So, and I was tweeting at the same time. Such great information. So thank you all again for joining us, whether you're virtual or live. Keep an eye on your CTL emails. We will be giving you some more information on things as they change. I want to again thank all of our board members who are here and Ruth in the UK, as well as thank Wendy and Louise for all the wonderful work that they've done to create this event and make it such a great experience for all of you, whether you're here virtually or in person. So thank you. Let's give them a hand. So stay in touch. Stay on the CTL Conf. Thank you again to Eric for sponsoring this event from Career Insights. And we will see you at the next CTL event. We have Brain Day coming up in November in terms of our events, and we'll be in touch. So thank you.